Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. We thank you for joining us for this informative dialogue that we're going to have today on shaping Canada's new code of conduct on economic abuse, protecting seniors and survivors. This event is being held in partnership with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, and Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. In October this past year, the Department of Finance Canada announced the government's plan to work with stakeholders and banks to develop a voluntary code of conduct for the prevention of economic abuse. We have an esteemed panel of speakers joining us today to have an informed dialogue on shaping the code of conduct to support and promote financial empowerment and independence of victims and survivors. Before we begin, I would like to provide our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land and its waters as protectors of its natural abundance throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land that remains our home to this day. May this relationship be one of peace and friendship, based in honor and deep respect. Before we begin, we just have a few logistics to go through. Everyone's microphones and cameras will be turned off as attendees. When our speakers will be speaking, they will be turning on their cameras and microphones for everyone to view. We do encourage everyone to post comments in the chat box during the session. If you have a specific question for the panel or any of the speakers today, please post that in the Q&A box, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. Just also a note that during the presentation, we do have people that, representative that will be posting links to resources, websites, documents in the chat box. Those links and resources will be posted after the session, along with the recording on our websites. And as mentioned, we have our ASL interpreter support today. You can change the layout in your own computer screen. At the top grid, there's a little box, little grid box that you can change the layout of how it best suits your needs. And you can also enable the closed captioning on the bottom menu button where you see ACC to have that on your screen as well. As I mentioned, today's session is recorded. It will be posted on our websites of the partners after the session, along with the links and documents, as I mentioned before. At the end of the session, we would appreciate your feedback. There will be a short survey link that will be posted in the chat box, as well as a pop-up at the end of the session when you log out. And we'll also, if you don't have time today, we'll be sending that link in the follow-up email with the link to the recording where you can access that in a few days. And I do want to indicate that today's topic does involve some sensitive information. So we do want to provide a content warning. So the information that we'll be discussing today on the panel will cover topics related to trauma and abuse. Some discussions may include personal stories, experiences, or discussions that could be distressing or triggering for some individuals. We want to ensure that everyone feels comfortable and informed while participating in this conversation. Please take breaks in the webinar if you need to. We have resources. Please visit the website that will be put in the chat box if you need supports within the region that you are in. Please feel free to reach out to anyone if you do need that support during the session today. Also, just want to remind people that that we do respect people's privacy and confidentiality in hosting our public events. So if there's a certain situation or circumstance that you would like further support in that relates to the issues we're speaking today, please reach out to our organization and we can connect you with the supports that you need, either by phone or by email, phone or through our website. You can contact us that way as well. So it gives me great pleasure to begin our session today by introducing our keynote speaker. We are so pleased to have Judith Hamill, the Director General for Financial Services Division of the Financial Sector Policy Branch at the Department of Finance Canada. In that role, she oversees policy development on a wide range of financial sector issues, including files related to consumer protection, digital assets, payments, policy, and consumer-driven banking, or open banking. Before joining Finance Canada, Judith held a number of executive positions, leading economic analysis teams at Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Privy Council Office. She has a Bachelor of Science in Economics and Political Science and a Master of Science in Economics, both from the Université de Montréal. Outside her work, she spends most time with her partner, Felix, and her 3 children. So welcome, Judith, and I will turn it over to you.
Hello, and thank you to the organizers for bringing us all together to talk about this important topic today. So I'm joining you from snowy Ottawa, and I bring you the greetings from the Office of Minister of Finance, François-Philippe Champagne, who is very seized by the issue of financial consumer protection. So I guess humbly, I can say that I'm really honored to be with you to talk about the Code of Conduct on the Prevention of Economic Abuse today. It's still a top item on the to-do list of my team at the Department of Finance. And as the Director General of that team, I come to you today with 2 messages. So the first message is serious, it is heartfelt. I want to acknowledge and recognize the victims and the survivors of economic abuse, and right behind them, the advocates and the researchers and the service providers who have spent years drawing attention to economic abuse and pushing for meaningful change. Your hard work has shaped the conversation that we are having today, so thank you very, very much. Economic abuse is often hidden in plain sight. It can affect people at any stage of life. Seniors and those experiencing gender-based violence are particularly exposed. The consequences are serious, they're long-lasting. They can follow someone long after the abuse itself has ended. One of the central challenges in addressing economic abuse is that it sits at the intersection of financial systems and personal safety, personal relationships. So it's at the intersection between the very private and the very official. Often, financial institutions' employees are among the first to observe changes in financial behaviors. Yet, they have not always had clear guidance on how to respond. So that gap and the need to close that gap is what brings us together today. Last fall, the federal government marked an important step forward with the announcement of the work with federally regulated banks to develop a voluntary code of conduct for the prevention of economic abuse. This commitment reflects growing recognition that economic abuse requires a coordinated response across government, regulators, financial institutions, and community-based organizations. As part of that same announcement, the government also announced the creation of a financial crimes agency to lead efforts to combat sophisticated financial crimes. So this will include investigating complex cases of money laundering and organized criminal activity. And the government launched the first ever Canada's National Anti-Fraud Strategy, which will be a multi-sector approach to tackle the growing issue of financial fraud. So this shows you how all issues related to financial consumer protection really matter to the government. But let me elaborate more on the importance of the Code of Conduct for the prevention of economic abuse and the significant role it will play. So Code of Conduct codes of conduct establish shared expectation and a common framework for action. They turn good intention into clearer, more consistent practice. They create clarity where uncertainty has existed. The code will support consistent responses across institutions and across the country. We know it can be done. It has been done elsewhere. So UK Finance, for example, a financial services industry association in the United Kingdom, introduced a financial abuse code in 2018. Down under in Australia, the Australian Banking Association issued an industry guideline in 2021. So we have these international experiences to learn from. They're telling us that the value of the code will lie not only in the words on paper. The value of the code also lies largely in the collaborative process to develop it. Collaboration allows the government and financial institutions to bring operational expertise from outside. Advocates, survivors bring lived experience that highlights how policies play out in the real life for real people. The government provides oversight and continuity to ensure that the code is aligned with broader consumer protection goals. So here is the second message I have today. It's a message of collaboration. So the Department of Finance has been engaging with stakeholders and will be holding roundtables with a discussion paper to help guide the development of the code. What we're looking at is how banks can concretely respond to economic abuse by embedding prevention and response in their everyday operations, equipping their staff with the appropriate training to support the victims and the survivors. As this work moves forward, success will depend on continued engagement and openness. The effectiveness of the code will be shaped by how well it reflects real-world conditions and how it can be integrated in everyday practices at financial institutions. So today's discussion is part of that process. It is an opportunity to share perspectives and build trust. Build trust across sectors that do not always work closely together. So I came to you today with two messages, I guess. So the message one, a grateful acknowledgement of your work, your commitment, your leadership on this issue. Message two, moving forward, we still need you. So I'll say something you know already because I already said it, but this is a government priority. And your advocacy has produced that government commitment. In the next few weeks, the department will conduct targeted engagement on the code. And success will depend on input that we will be receiving from stakeholders. Every voice will count. The discussion we are having today is really part of this. And I'm really looking forward to the panel and the Q&A discussion. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay for the whole event. I'll have to leave before the end, but be assured that members of my team are online and they will be taking very good notes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith, for the keynote presentation and opening up the discussion and sort of laying the framework for the rationale for the voluntary code of conduct and how we can move forward. And I think this is a very good start for that conversation as we have key partners joining us today and many online who are wanting to listen and share their perspectives. So I'm sure many are going to be looking for that opportunity to participate in those consultations and opportunities that you are going to offer the public to participate in providing their perspective. So thank you. And we thank you for joining most of the session today as much as you can. And I know that your colleagues are joining us as well. So thank you again. And I will now turn it over to my colleague, Michaela Mayer from the CCEF. And I'm just going to bring up her presentation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much to Judith for the opening remarks or the keynote. So my name is Michaela Meyer. I am with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. And before I begin the presentation, I want to acknowledge that CCFWE is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And myself, I'm calling in from Tiohtià:ke, which is also known as Montreal, the unceded territory of many different nations, amongst them also the Haudenosaunee and Mohawk. Actually, we can go, to the next slide. So as we discuss economic abuse and financial exploitation, I think it is important to also recognize that these harms are not new, but also embedded in the history and legacy of colonization in Canada. So efforts to prevent economic abuse must also be seen in the context and aligned with ongoing work towards reconciliation. From my side, my quick presentation, I will provide you some information on our organization, so CCFWE, and our work, what economic abuse is, and the role of banks when it comes to the prevention of economic abuse. And finally, I will finish with some significant milestones that led us to the Code of Conduct. Next slide. Great. So the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment is the only non-profit organization in Canada dedicated to addressing economic abuse and advancing survivors' financial independence, particularly for women, gender-diverse people, and equity-serving communities. Next slide. So we have various sections of our work that includes research and evidence. So we conducted various first-of-their-kind research studies on economic abuse in Canada and its prevalence. Then in system change, we are engaging with all levels of government, service providers, NGOs, international partner organizations, and industry sectors, specifically financial institutions, to introduce economic abuse into national and international policy frameworks and fight root causes of inequality. For training and education, we deliver information sessions and trauma-informed workshops that increase awareness about economic abuse. And we also develop various tools and resources that are free, available on our website in various languages for survivors, for social service providers, financial institutions, and nonprofits. For technology and innovation, we've developed Canada's first mobile app focused on offering support for economic abuse survivors to regain financial empowerment. And it's also available, I think, in 5 languages. We also work on digital safety and the prevention of technology-facilitated financial abuse. And then finally, programs and peer support. So we currently have 2 financial empowerment programs, the Shield to Thrive for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized survivors, and a Reclaim and Rise project for refugee survivors. And so for past and present participants, we also provide wraparound services such as free tax services now that tax season begins. And so now I will be talking a bit more about economic abuse, since we'll be spending a lot of time now in the next hour and a half to talk about economic and financial abuse. So I thought I would provide a bit more information on what this entails. So economic abuse is a form of family and gender-based violence involving the control, exploitation, or sabotage of a person's economic resources with the goal to undermine their independence and security. In short, a partner who uses violence tries to keep a victim survivor economically dependent and in control, so the victim survivor literally cannot afford to leave. Our own research confirms similar numbers from the UK and the US, that around 96% of domestic abuse survivors have also reported experiencing economic abuse. It means that almost all domestic abuse survivors have reported or have experienced also economic abuse. And when we look at it a bit further, we generally differentiate between 3 types of economic abuse. The first is economic control, which includes when a victim survivor does not have access to personal or a joint bank account, but they're also a lot of times only get a cash allowance and have to justify everything they spend. Victim survivors also not have information on their family financial situation or are not getting involved in any financial decisions. Economic exploitation means the misuse of money, such as spending money on other things that should actually go towards paying bills. Then actual fraud. So, for example, opening up a credit card in the victim's name without their knowledge or consent, or coercing the victim to sign debt or mortgages. And finally, employment and education sabotage means that the harassment at work, or so a victim survivor loses the job or finally gives up and quits, or then also preventing a victim survivor to get employment or education in the first place. The next slide, yeah. So unfortunately, economic abuse doesn't end when someone leaves. So even after separation, victim survivors suffer the consequences of abuse. For example, when they're not aware of debt built up in their name, that prevents them then to get access to a small loan or even renting an apartment due to the low credit score, so even affordability aside. And without proper institutional support, they can suffer the long-term consequences. So with the development of the new Code of Conduct on the prevention of economic abuse, I want to share some insights from our consultations with victim survivors in Canada on their experiences with banks, as well as gaps and opportunities that we see for financial institutions. So CCFWE learned that banking staff are often the first line of contact for victim survivors to share potential financial abuse. There is still so much societal stigma and shame around money that many don't want to share their experiences with family or friends, but actually ask the bank for help. So financial institutions have a very unique position and an opportunity to detect and prevent further financial abuse from occurring. The next slide. So, however, when we ask survivors, they mention that financial institutions are not prepared to support them. So 70% of victim survivors said their bank did not recognize or respond appropriately when signs of abuses were present. And 90% mentioned they would feel so much safer if bank employees were trained to support clients facing economic abuse. So in general, yeah, we can go to the next slide. Sorry. In general, we see three main challenges that the banking sector is currently facing, and the new code of conduct should therefore also address. So as we heard from, so the first one is absence of trauma-informed services and knowledge of financial abuse. So as we just heard from victim survivors, they can feel unsupported, misunderstood, and in the worst case, re-traumatized. The second one would be lack of access to financial services and products. Many victim survivors don't have an ID as they have to leave in haste, or partners who use violence have withheld ID documents intentionally from them. But without an ID and or a low credit score due to coerced debt, survivors cannot access many banking products. But when victim survivors cannot access traditional banking, they are pushed towards predatory lending that traps them further in abuse and exploitation. And finally, the third challenge would be weaponizing of financial products. So partners who use violence can misuse financial products, such as through e-transfers or to harass and threaten victim survivors, but they can also include fraud, like opening a credit card in the victim's name without their knowledge to accumulate debt. And this is why CCFWE has advocated for years for the development of a framework for financial institutions to better support survivors of economic abuse. And we are thrilled to see the government taking this important step to introduce the establishment of the new Code of Conduct on the prevention of economic abuse. And so that we can address the current shortcomings and support financial institutions to better address economic abuse and support clients. So finally, I would just want to finish my presentation with showing a few of the key milestones from CCFWE as we are now working towards the Code of Conduct. So since its establishment in 2019, CCFWE has pushed and advocated for a code of conduct for the financial sector based on best practice examples in the UK and Australia. As early as 2021, CCFWE held roundtable discussions on the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. And one of the main recommendations that came out of those discussions was a code of conduct. So we continued pushing for this recommendation in various submissions to FCAC, the Status of Women Committee, in research reports and summits we organized. After all these years, it was therefore a great honor for us that our founder and executive director, Meseret, who will be on the panel after, gave the opening remarks to Minister Chapin's announcement of the Code of Conduct in October 2025. Another highlight was the Financial Future Summit that we organized in November of 2023. And it brought together over 80 representatives from the financial sector from the UK, Australia, and Canada. And they discussed best practices on how to make banking services more accessible and equitable for victim survivors. And the summit report highlighted a dozen tangible ways financial institutions in Canada could support victim survivors of economic abuse. And finally, a success story as well for us was in 2024, where CCFWE worked together with Women's Shelter Canada and wrote an open letter to all major banks, CBA and Interac, demanding action to stop the weaponization of e-transfers. And this followed fruitful discussions not only with CBA, a few banks, but also Interac itself, that committed to addressing the issue. And in March 2025, so just a few months after, Interac made the opt-out feature available. And I think my colleague is sharing the link with more information. This shows how effective collaboration between survivor-driven organizations and financial institutions can create institutional reforms and actual change with an impact on survivors across Canada. And so with the announcement of the Code of Conduct on the prevention of economic abuse, CCFWE is excited to continue the collaboration with the government and the financial sector to create safer financial systems for all, including survivors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michaela, for a great overview on the topic around economic abuse. I'm now going to ask my colleague, Benedict Schifflin from the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse to join me. Together, we are going to provide a brief overview around financial abuse and frauds that are affecting older adults. So I will first I'll introduce our organization, then I'll turn it over to Benedict, who will then follow up with a presentation on the financial abuse of older persons. So with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, we have our nonprofit organization that supports the implementation of Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse. That is focused on three main priorities, and these include community coordination and response, by building community capacity to identify and respond and support seniors affected by abuse, raising awareness about the complexities of elder abuse by providing education and outreach to seniors, and advocating for the rights of older adults, including our involvement with the Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. We provide many public education forums, including educational webinars, to ensure that everyone can navigate available resources and supports that contribute towards prevention, and training frontline responders and service providers who regularly interact with seniors to possess essential skills to detect, respond, intervene, and help prevent harm to further victims. EAPO envisions an Ontario where seniors are free from abuse, ageism, and have a strong voice to feel safe and respected. I'm now going to ask Benedict to introduce her organization and take us into our discussion.
Thank you, Rayanne. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some of you again, and welcome to all the new participants. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. We are the only pan-Canadian organization that is dedicated to the topic of elder abuse and neglect prevention. And our mission is really to build awareness, support, and capacity to reach a more coordinated pan-Canadian approach to the prevention of abuse, elder abuse and neglect. The core of our mission really is to promote the rights of older adults and ensure that we can all grow old in safety and in wellness. And we are always honored to be involved in events like this one, where we, participate in some knowledge sharing and collaborate with great organization. All this to advance both public education and policy reform. So I do not have slides today. I figured we would do it old style, but I wanted to talk a little bit about financial abuse and fraud as they affect older people. We've heard about economic abuse. Maybe some of you wonder why there is economic abuse, financial abuse. So I can tell you from our organizations what we mean by that and why it is a pressing issue. So we will split it, as I'll talk about financial abuse. Rayanne will talk about fraud shortly after that, give you a little breather. One thing that's important to understand is that both these issues have a heavy financial and emotional toll for victims. They often are kind of mentioned in the same breath, very often in the same conversations. They are, however, different, and it's important for us that they be understood clearly. So when we at CNPA and other organizations involved in elder abuse prevention talk about financial abuse, we're really talking about actions that frequently intersect with other forms of violence, of exploitation, of coercion. And they're usually strengthened in scenarios where there is either social isolation, dependency, and they can manifest often, actually always, in relationship where there is an expectation of trust between the person being victimized and the person doing the harm. So we're talking here about tricking, threatening, persuading older persons to let go of their property, of their possessions, of their money. I think a well-known example, for instance, is the misuse of a power of attorney. The common thread is that undue influence is involved, and it is also one of the most common forms of mistreatment generally. And by the way, if you hear me say mistreatment, abuse, mistreatment, I tend to use those two interchangeably. There's debate around this, but this is what I mean. You've probably seen articles about this. Financial abuse, I think, makes it in the media more and more because it is such a pressing issue. So it can be something like a person's money being withdrawn from their bank account, unusual transactions appearing after the person has given access or authority to access their account. Banking transactions are done without a person's consent. That's some of the examples. There are many, many forms. And I think it's easy when we read those things in the news to assume that it only affects a certain kind of people or a certain portion of the socioeconomic spectrum. And the reality is that abuse in general, including financial abuse, affects all of us. No one is particularly immune or more, it's the 2022 Canadian longitudinal study on aging reported or estimated that 1 in 10 older people over the age of 65 in Canada experience one form or more of mistreatment each year, with financial abuse usually close to the top for the most prominent form. So, and we know that this is a conservative estimate because most people are reluctant to come forward and report that they're experiencing or have experienced mistreatment. There's a lot of reasons why that is. Some of it is, just stigma and shame or not wanting to create additional issues for the person who's doing harm to them. And the reason for that is that in 81% of cases, the person that is causing the harm is someone that is close to the older person. And here we're talking a partner, a family member, a friend, a neighbor. So this is an issue that has deep roots in our communities and that needs to be looked at extremely closely. There are many motivations why that can lead to financial abuse. Very often you'll hear there's a sort of false sense of entitlement to someone's finances, this idea that, well, as a child this money will be mine one day, so why not now? There's need and greed, this idea of wanting or needing money now. There's many socioeconomic factors that can kind of lead to this way of thinking. And of course, opportunity, having the sudden access to funds or property. And also misunderstanding, if potentially in the role of having a power of attorney, also not understanding what the expectations and obligations that come with this responsibility are. it's a very complex scenarios or a collection of scenarios, one that very often exists in a lot of gray zones because it involves family dynamics quite often, but it is a deeply concerning form of abuse and a very serious issue. And what's important to understand is that it's not just about what's taken, it's not just about the financial aspect, which has itself a lot of consequences for the victims and survivors. It's also about how it's done, because it's done under the guise of trust, of interdependence or dependence. So it's something that is deeply distressing for the person who is experiencing it, with a very, very heavy consequences, both on their physical and mental health, in addition to their financial health. And it's something that also affects us. It ripples through the family, the community, and then further down through the social structure and the services around all of us. So that's, in a nutshell, what financial abuse is and how it is understood through the lens of elder abuse, of mistreatment. And now I wanted to invite Breanne to tell us a little bit about the differences with fraud.
Thanks, Benedict. Thanks for that overview. And as Benedict said, fraud is often in the same context or sentences when people are talking about the financial mistreatment of individuals, seniors. But fraud is different because unlike financial abuse, where it's committed by someone that the person knows, a family member, someone close to them, fraud is usually perpetrated by a stranger. So often part of a large organized crime system, usually done by phone or online fraud, through even more local homegrown fraudulent schemes that exist. And it's not only done at a local level, it's usually on a national or international in scope. You hear about this in the news almost daily. As Benedict said, we are seeing an increase of media attention to the victimization of older adults, that they're losing sometimes their life savings to these frauds that are happening to their family members. Most frauds do involve solicitation originating in one country, could be targeting victims in another country with money going to yet a different country. So the complexities of tracking, reporting, getting money in return after a fraud has happened is very complex. As well, you can understand the investigation point from a policing point of view, trying to track and return people's funds that have been taken advantage of them financially. Fraudsters, similar to financial abuse, they build on that trust. Even though you don't know that person, that you feel that you have developed a relationship, even if it is online through Facebook or social media, that you're communicating through texting, where over time you have developed that relationship. So they build on that trust with their targets, and they operate on that emotional manipulation. They often create that facade of a relationship to exploit the older adult, which we often see in romance scams. And what we see often in this time of year, with Valentine's right around the corner, there's a lot more education that are going on around frauds and romance scams, because we want people to be more aware of how they can prevent, or even if they are currently a victim, how they can prevent this. So having opportunities like our webinar today may reach out to others that might be in a position of being taken advantage of by fraudsters. But older adults are often face disproportionate exposure to fraud, including the telephone online scams, the impersonation fraud, AI-generated fraud, romance frauds, as I mentioned, but also investment schemes, and those are just a few. Victims send large amounts of money, usually by now through cryptocurrency, could be by e-transfers or even wire transfers, which are often untraceable or hard to obtain where that money is actually going, particularly in online romance scams or other scams where people are told to send the money as an urgent thing. You need to do it today. You'll make arrangements to get the money picked up at your house if that's the case. Fraudsters are very savvy in the ways that they're coming up with strategies to get your money quickly and get out of the picture right away as well. The fraud affects and targets all of us, but older people are amongst most targeted and harmed by fraud due to the complex nature of the social, psychological, and health factors, such as the gap in digital literacy and technology proficiency. Some older adults may be trusting more than younger counterparts and maybe more obligated or feel obliged to give that money or speak openly about with that person. Maybe it's that figure that they think is someone in a position of authority, so they go by what the person is saying, depending on the scam. There's also that feeling of loneliness and isolation that drive more people online, seeking connection or romantic connection with someone else, paired with a lack of support or a circle of trust that they turn to when in doubt. So they may not have someone to speak to, or the fraudster themselves sometimes alienates them from their supports that they have already in their lives. For some, changes in capacity in terms of maybe the onset of a dementia could also make that person an easier target. So as fraudsters become more sophisticated with their technology and schemes, frauds will continue to impact their lives, threatening their safety, security, and their financial well-being. We know that this problem is not only a problem that's been in the past, but it's escalating. According to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, last year, in 2024, $643 million was stolen due to frauds in Canada, representing a 300% increase since 2020. The amount lost to seniors made up 28% of the overall dollars, accounting for $181 million. So you can imagine how devastating this could be to individuals who sometimes lose their life savings, their home, and other property. Fraud losses for 2025 are on track to be just as high or higher, with over 544 million already reported in September in 2025. However, it's estimated these could be much higher because we know that only 5 to 10% of individuals actually report frauds to the authorities, including the Anti-Fraud Center. Often similar to financial abuse, there's feelings of shame, embarrassment, being victimized, the fear or threats that the scammer or the fraudster has given them, or the lack of awareness of where to reach out for help. These crimes have left seniors, as I said, losing their life savings, and sometimes those connections with families and friends that they've alienated or don't feel comfortable going back to because of that shame or embarrassment that has happened to them. So financial abuse and fraud have individual and broader social costs. So we all have a collective interest in preventing and addressing it. The initial code of conduct for delivery of banking services to seniors was the first step in the direction to addressing financial abuse and fraud targeting older persons and limiting financial harm. And it is our hope that this new code of conduct on economic abuse will strengthen the ability of financial institutions to engage in both prevention and response toward economic abuse. Benedict?
Yes, hello, I'm back. I was just looking at the time because I don't want to eat up too much of the panel time, and I wanted to give people, I think, a couple of minutes to just take a break briefly. So here's what we're going to do. It is currently quarter to the hour. Let's give it 2 minutes so you have a chance to digest what you heard, get a glass of water, and when we come back, we'll start with the panel. Thank you. Okay, and we're back. So before, I guess I'm going to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras, turn on their microphones, so we can get started. And before we dive right into it, a reminder that we have the wonderful Lauren from CCFWE monitoring the chat box and posting resources since the start. So keep an eye on it. As we are talking during the panel, there will be additional resources shared. And yes, this session is being recorded. It will be posted, and all the resources that are currently in the chat box will be listed as well, so you can find them all in one place at the end. So this said, I'm very happy to welcome our panelists today. Rayanne, if you have a chance to share your screen so we can have a look at our guests' brief bio. Wonderful. So it is my pleasure today to welcome a wonderful group of people who are working from different parts of our society together to address the question of economic abuse. And so today we're going to have a short Q&A with Jane Shannon, who is, and my eyes are really bad, so I'm going to make this bigger for myself, if you don't mind. Jane Shannon, who is the Senior Manager of Regulatory Change Initiatives at Scotiabank. We're also joined by Sarah Bradley, the Ombudsman and CEO for Banking Services and Investment, OMSI. Laurie Lupton and Charles Docherty, who are respectively Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications and Assistant General Counsel, Vice President Legal and Risk at the Canadian Bankers Association. Meseret Haley-Jesus, who is the founder and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, as well as Sandra, who has very kindly agreed to join us today to share her personal experiences and perspectives as someone who was a victim of romance scam. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of launch us with a question directed at Laurie and Charles of the Canadian Bankers Association. We're talking today about the future or developing code of conduct on economic abuse, but there's recently, in the last few years, also been a code of conduct for the delivery of banking services to seniors. And I was wondering if you could briefly walk us through how the Canadian Bankers Association approached the development of this code. So what were, the principles at the heart of it, the drivers, and how did you involve your sector in this work?
Thanks so much. I want to say thank you to our hosts and other panelists for joining us here today. We appreciate the courage of everyone who's working on this, and for the people who are sharing their experiences, thank you. As a starting note, I would like to say that banks are firmly against any sort of abuse. The banking sector takes a number of steps to try and prevent, identify, protect, and support victims of financial abuse. We understand it can be difficult to identify abuse. An organization may only become aware of it, that includes banks, when a victim brings that to them. And that can be a hard ask, which is why we continue to be engaged in these dialogues so that we can learn ways to support further. I do want to echo our earlier panelists and talk about the importance of collaboration, and also what I've heard as the importance of the continued dialogue and sharing of information. So I'd like to say we're very grateful to be able to speak to that today. We're always committed to continuing the dialogue, and what that looks like depends on the particular problem we're solving. So if I think about when we were working on intimate partner violence, to understand that better, the best practices, we engage with experts and those with lived experience. So when it was intimate partner violence, we met with a number of stakeholders, which include UK Finance, the Australian Banking Association, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Catherine Fitzpatrick, who's an expert, Interac, who helped us work to find a solution on one issue that was highlighted earlier, Women's Shelter of Canada, and of course, the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. We similarly heard about some of the heartbreaking scams, and I think we're going to hear some more on that. One of the key differences was highlighted, and I think it's worth reiterating, that in intimate partner violence and with elder abuse, what you're often seeing is the difference is someone known to the abuser versus someone who's at a distance. And the scams that are being run, we cannot highlight enough that these are often large transnational organizations, and the money from those crimes is going on to fund other crimes often. So these are going into horrific things like human trafficking, international drug trafficking, things like that. So the victims need support in all cases, but the mechanisms of those crimes are quite different. We are leaders on the anti-scam work. We're part of a coalition. I would encourage people to look for resources there on the scam front. It's the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition. And there's good information about how to protect yourself, but also what to do if you think you've been a victim of a scam. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Charles now to talk a little bit about the Seniors Code and how that came to be.
Thanks, Laurie. So the banking sector has been very active in this area and is committed to giving victim survivors the support they need. We believe the focus for the Prevention of Economic Abuse Code should be building on the solid foundation that has been established by banks to date. And I echo Laurie's call for this work to continue. Now, in terms of the question related to the development of the Code of Conduct for the delivery of banking services to seniors, by way of background, in 2019, the government announced that to respond to the unique needs of Canada's aging population, the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada would engage with banks and seniors groups to create a code of conduct to guide banks in their delivery of services to Canada's seniors, and that the Minister of Seniors would support this engagement. Clearly, at that time, there was an acknowledgement of an aging population, and in response, the code was developed in consultation with the FCAC. The Seniors Code provided a single document, a consolidation of everything banks were already doing. For example, it references the commitment on powers of attorney and joint deposit accounts, and it helped to create a standard across the sector, and in some cases, some new obligations, such as the designation of a seniors champion, which is a member of the bank's senior management to promote seniors' interests. But it also consolidated and referenced existing laws, such as accessibility, formalized training, and did a bunch of other things, as Judith Hamel mentioned at the start, really kind of formalized what a lot of the things that banks were already doing. That's all I had for now.
That's great. Thank you so much. I wanted to now turn to Jane from Scotiabank, Jane Shannon, because here we'd love to hear from your perspective, from the institutional perspective. How has that code of conduct for delivery of banking services to seniors changed the way that your bank engages with older clients? Because we've just heard a little bit about what the goals were. Could you share maybe one or two concrete examples of perhaps practices that were introduced or adapted, and whether they've had impacts that you've observed so far?
Sure, of course. So thank you again so much for having me this afternoon. I appreciate being here. What can I say? Seniors are among Scotiabank's most loyal clients, and treating them fairly and respectfully has always been a priority for us. The introduction of the Seniors Code has only reinforced the importance of ongoing education and awareness of the issues that are impacting seniors, both for our client-facing employees as well as for seniors themselves. The code underscores the need to equip our employees, whether they're in branch or they're on the phone, with the training, the tools, and the resources to help build their knowledge and confidence when supporting our senior clients. When employees feel confident and informed, they are better able to respond to the diverse needs of seniors in the moment and deliver a consistent and inclusive banking experience. One way that we support the code at Scotiabank is through our Seniors Ambassador Network, where we have ambassadors in branches with a higher number of senior clients and within our Global Client Experience Center. Ambassadors are given extra tools, resources, and insights from both their peers and from internal and external partners, and they in turn share this information with their teams. For example, during Seniors Month last June, we had Rayanne speak with our ambassadors about recognizing the signs of financial elder abuse and how to help prevent it. We've also had law enforcement speak with our ambassadors about scams that are specifically targeting seniors. And these conversations really do help build confidence and give our employees the practical insights that they can use when they're supporting our senior clients. While the Seniors Code, it emphasizes effective communication, its introduction has reinforced the importance of ensuring that seniors clearly understand their financial circumstances. When seniors have a strong understanding of their financial situation, they are better positioned to make informed decisions about their financial well-being, to protect themselves from potential financial harm, and navigate any current issues or trends that may affect them. To support effective communication and financial understanding, in addition to a Seniors Resource Center on our website, we share educational materials with our senior clients every other month via email. These materials cover a broad range of topics, including the importance of having a will and a power of attorney, how to have conversations about estate planning, and planning for retirement. We also share podcasts with our senior clients featuring both internal and external speakers on issues that are relevant to them. For example, we had a detective from the Toronto Police Services Financial Crimes Unit speak about how to identify the signs of a scam, how to protect yourself, and what to do if you do become a victim. As well, our branch employees engage with our seniors in their local communities by attending seniors residences and community events where they lead discussions, again, on matters that are affecting seniors and their finances, and they share relevant information and resources. So all of this content that I've mentioned, it is purely educational. It is not focused on promoting products or services. And what we have found is that engagement has been strong, which we believe reflects how timely and relevant these topics are for seniors. So these are just some examples how we have embraced the principles of the Seniors Code at Scotiabank and the impact that it's had on our client-facing employees and senior clients alike.
Thank you very much for your answer. I'm seeing more and more things coming through the chat. And I wanted to say before we continue, we have our kind ASL interpreters asking us if we can to slow down a little bit. And I'll apologize because I'm guilty of it. I always speak too fast. I wanted now to invite Sandra, who is with us today, to speak with us because I guess it is not that common that we get to hear directly from someone who has experienced something as terrible as a romance scam. And so I cannot say how much I appreciate you being present today and very bravely and generously sharing your experience with us. Can you share your experience as a victim of fraud in terms of how your bank responded or supported you in this situation? That I think there's probably a lot going on at that moment. And, what do you wish had been different, whether it's reporting or recovery, help with rebuilding your sense of confidence and safety?
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me to join this important topic. The reason I decided to share my story is because when I started to share it with my family and people that I know quite well, the response was, how could you get involved in this? You're so smart. And I think this is why people don't report. But I think what we need to realize is that banking institutions and a society, that this has nothing to do with anyone's intelligence. I strongly feel that, and because I experienced myself, that I was targeted by these scammers. I feel very strongly that they had all the information that they needed to psychologically manipulate me into a scam. I think they're well versed on understanding the psychology of manipulation especially in terms of process addictions. I think we're seeing a lot of information now about process addictions through various forms of the internet with the youth, social media, certainly is falling into romance scams as well. So I had met this person on eHarmony, and what I found most interesting is that, well, two things. Firstly, the red flags that I would have normally noticed, I didn't really cue into, because he had created a relationship pattern that was very consistent with the relationship pattern that I had with a previous partner. So all of the conversations and the stories and the chit chats were very familiar to me. So in terms of identifying red flags, in terms of how I was being manipulated, that wasn't the case. And I also feel very strongly that they are trained in the psychological ways to manipulate people into, like you said, gaining their trust, just creating a sense of urgency to I call it prime for the crime. That's the way I look at it. I was definitely primed for 2 months in terms of getting involved with this person, and then transferred him quite a significant amount of money for his business ventures that were going under. I don't know if you want any more about the romance scam, but it's definitely something that's out there, and it's not anything to do with intelligence. It's definitely psychological manipulation. Getting back to reporting, and I just want to highlight some of the red flags that I've come up against as I was reflecting quite vigorously on this whole process. How did I get involved in it? Getting my cognitive processes a little bit more engaged in the scam. Firstly, the scam was came out of the United States, and I really want to compliment the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center for helping me report. But then I also went to the United States government in terms of getting involved with reporting the scammer in the other country. So that, I think, in terms of, we know that these are transnational organizations. So looking at ways that we can partner where the origin of the scam comes from, and making sure that we're doing our due diligence to report everywhere where these scams occur. And then when I was doing my homework in terms of what happened with the bank, I find it quite shocking that with the bank that I have, that, I think the scammers manipulate the financial systems where there are gaps and holes. And until we close up the gaps and the holes, they're going to continue to ask for wire transfers, for cash, et cetera. But according to my bank, I can transfer up to $50,000 daily to any place in the world without question. And I could do this from the convenience of my home, click of a button, off the money goes, with no system of checks and balances to say, is this a legitimate wire transfer and why are you doing it? In contrast, the same bank also has a branch in the United States where their process is different, where you have to submit a wire transfer agreement form in writing, and then you have to call the toll-free number to process the wire transfer. So I found it interesting, same bank with two different processes. So I question then for the financial institutions, like, what can be done to assure the consumer, as I was, has a system of checks and balances to not just be able to click a few buttons, put in the SWIFT and the whatever information, and then off the money goes. The other thing that I did is, when I talked to a friend about this, she helped me block the caller, and I immediately reported it to the bank. I put it here in my timelines, and I'm going to just say what my piece is on it because it's really important to me. I sent the wire transfer on September 15th at 4:46 p.m. Pacific time. I notified the bank in writing and via telephone the next day, the next morning at 11:51 to ask if they could transfer or cancel the fraud. Now, the fraud says within 2 to 5 business days, the wire transfer will be processed. So then my question was, well, hopefully they'll be able to stop it because I submitted it within the 2 days. I then got notification from my financial advisor that we won't know for a couple of days if the request is retrieved and whether or not the wire transfer was successful. She also said that the wire transfer payments go to Toronto before they are sent out for worldwide transfer. So that whole wire transfer process and how it happens really, I feel, got me in a vulnerable position where I really think if there were some stop gaps at the very beginning of the wire transfer and to understand the process of the transfer differently, why I put in a request to have the wire transfer stopped and it wasn't stopped within that 2 days. And since I have contacted my bank, I have not heard back about my complaint or my dispute. So in terms of romance scams and abuse, certainly there's a psychological manipulation that happens in the scam. And then I really strongly feel that this isn't such an important work we're doing to try to close the gaps in the banking system to prevent cybercrime from continuing.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for sharing this. I think there was a lot of things you said that resonated with our audience, especially when it comes to the victim blaming and the sense of, the having nothing to do with the person's intelligence, that it's all by design. So thank you again for sharing this. Now, kind of logically moving to Sarah Bradley at the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. From your vantage point, right? The OBSI handles complaints and supports people who have experienced fraud or financial abuse. What patterns do you see emerge when a bank fails their client, like Sandra was describing? And did the code of conduct for banking with seniors influence either your work or the outcomes for the people who come to you?
Thanks for the question, Benedict, and thanks for the invitation. It's such an important topic. From our vantage point, and as you mentioned, we're here to investigate and resolve disputes that banks and consumers haven't been able to resolve themselves. Among the complaints that we're dealing with, there's one issue that really stands out above any other, and that is fraud. It impacts Canadians of all ages and abilities, really. But in recent years, we've just seen such an unprecedented rise in fraud-related complaints, mainly driven by digital and impersonation-based scams. In our banking mandate now, about a third of cases we deal with involve fraud. So last year, that was over 1,800 investigations. And every one of those cases is a terrible story. There's devastating harm, something that can just be lost when we're just talking about numbers, as Sandra's story unfortunately shows. But of course, we all know that. That's why we're here today. So, the reality, though, is that in most of these cases, we're not able to recommend compensation. And that's because we don't have a legal or a regulatory basis to do that. In the cases, though, when we do recommend compensation in fraud cases, it's usually because our investigation has shown that the bank didn't meet an obligation that it had, maybe under the Code of Practice for Debit Card Services or the Seniors Code, or hasn't lived up to its own public representations about fraud protection, or has failed to prevent a specific fraud when it had the opportunity to do so. When we're looking at a fraud case, the key issue often is whether the bank has taken reasonable steps to protect its clients from a foreseeable risk. So a few observations about that. First of all, strong consumer protection really depends not just on the rules and the systems, but on people, right? People and their training. How empowered are the bank's staff to recognize risk, ask questions, act when something doesn't look right? Very often, like that is a very important point of contact and point of prevention. Bank failures to prevent a fraud rarely stem from just one mistake. Usually there's sort of a series of missed opportunities, like points where there could have been judgment or curiosity or intervention that could reasonably have changed the outcome for the consumer. And we'll also look at whether the bank actually applied its internal policies, especially escalation protocols, fraud responses, their guidance for staff. It's not really about whether the policies exist. It's more about how are they actually implemented on the ground. We often see in cases that risk signals might be identified but not acted on. We see patterns where unusual activity isn't treated as unusual, even though it might depart from a client's historical patterns. There's missed opportunities for a challenge, for an escalation, for a follow-up. Sometimes bank employees actually have discretion to try to act in the consumer's best interest, but in practice, it's not really applied evenly, even when there are warning signs. And some banks also will rely heavily on authorization. Obviously, authorization is a very important concept for banks and their clients, but there's also a lot of fraud prevention that can and should be focused on the nature of the transaction, the pattern of the conduct, whether the consumer is acting reasonably, or whether they're behaving in a way that might line up with patterns of deception or pressure or sophisticated frauds. Sometimes there's a failure to inquire about a third party involvement in the situation, or just missed opportunities to pause, to warn, to clarify. In terms of the Seniors Code, it has made a real world difference. The Seniors Code has clarified expectations of reasonable conduct for banks. It gives a clear reference point for what reasonable care looks like for older clients. It has strengthened the focus on bank behavior in investigations. So it allows us to examine that question through the lens of the code. It shifts the attention really also towards prevention and to fairness, where we can really look to whether reasonable steps were taken. And I think there's a couple of things to observe about the Seniors Code. The first is it sets out expectations. It doesn't have a lot of rigid rules. And I think that has both positive and negative consequences. On the one hand, it means that interpretation of the code and what it means in a given situation can be the subject of debate and differences of interpretation. We do have a lot of back and forth with banks on that question. But on the other hand, it gives banks and our investigators room to focus on reasonableness and context rather than box checking.
Excellent answer. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm looking at the time and I really want to give the panelists time to answer a couple more questions. So I don't know that we'll get to Q&A from the public, but if you do have questions for us or any of the panelists present today, please send us your questions directly by email. Lauren will share that in the chat box. I wanted to go back and kind of invite everyone, so CBA, Scotiabank, and Sarah from OBSI who just spoke for that kind of group question. So we've talked about the Seniors Code. Now the federal government has announced the Code on Economic Abuse with a focus on identifying and responding to coercive control over money and credit. How do you see the interplay, the existing Seniors Code informing this new code? What are the lessons that should carry over to help the Economic Abuse Code as it's being developed? I don't know if anyone wants to take the lead.
I'm happy to take the lead. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So in many ways, the Seniors Code, it has laid the groundwork for the new Code of Conduct on the Prevention of Economic Abuse. The Seniors Code focuses on mitigating financial harm by ensuring that client-facing employees have access to the tools and the resources and the training that they need to understand and respond to the needs of seniors. It also emphasizes the importance of effective, clear communication to help seniors make informed decisions about their financial well-being and to protect themselves from financial harm. Those same principles, the prevention of financial harm, employee enablement, and clear and respectful client communication, I think are important to identifying and addressing economic abuse across all client segments, including situations, as you said, that involve coercion, control over money or credit. And I think they can meaningfully inform the development of the Economic Abuse Code. One important insight from implementing the Seniors Code is that financial abuse is not always obvious for many reasons, which we've talked about, in part because some victims may be in denial or unwilling to come forward due to embarrassment or fear. Employees really do need the confidence and the skills to recognize those subtle warning signs and to engage clients in conversations that are supportive, that they're respectful and empathetic. And at the same time, clients who may be experiencing or are at risk of economic abuse, they really do need clear, practical information about the signs of abuse, how to protect themselves, and where to go for help, including victim support services, along with reassurance, again, that experiencing financial abuse is, unfortunately, it's not uncommon and that victims are not alone. So I think that balance between protection, empowerment, and respect for client independence is an important consideration as the Economic Abuse Code is developed.
Thank you, Jane. Lori, Sarah, and Charles, wherever, yeah, I couldn't see you. Do you have anything to add?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I think that there's a few really important lessons that we can learn from the Seniors Code and from other practices that have emerged, in Canada and around the world. One of the key things, as I referred to in my earlier remarks, is that staff empowerment is really crucial. The outcomes are going to depend heavily on how bank staff are going to actually act, and they're the ones who are very often able to see the abuse, see the fraud when it's happening. And early intervention is so important. When a risk is identified early, activities can be paused, concerns escalated, additional questions, often that will reduce the harm. Also, there's a couple of things that we've seen on the securities side, the investments industry has implemented. Things like the trusted contact person initiatives, where seniors and others with a vulnerable circumstances identify early on, like just for the bank as part of the account opening, really, a trusted person that the bank can reach out to contact if they have concerns, if they have things that they want to raise, to ask for assistance with the individual. Another is the safe harbor, what's called a safe harbor protection, that gives bank employees and firms the ability to put a pause on transactions without any fear that they might be liable for any sort of harm that comes from the pause. Very often, like firms and employees in firms want to do the right thing. They want to help. They can see what is happening, and this gives them the ability to do that. And I'd also just, as a final note, just mention that the principles should be applied not just to the services that are being offered, but also to product design and eligibility criteria. Often accessibility really isn't the issue. Really, it's the appropriateness that's the issue. We heard Sandra mention the $50,000 a day of global money transfer. Really, is it appropriate that should be offered as part of a basic online banking package? Considering the safety and risk profile of products should also be a key part of any system design.
Thank you,
I'll just
Sarah.
hop in if I can. Yeah.
Yes.
Just a few thoughts. I would like to sort of continue the theme of education and awareness in multiple directions. With the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition, we have the Stop, Check, Talk as our call to action, and this sort of talk is so critical, and it's important for the elder protection. It's important for intimate partner violence. Anyone experiencing this, need not feel stigmatized. We understand that can happen, but the more we can talk about it and bring it into the light, the better our ability to prevent is. We will be engaged with government as it looks to build on this. The Seniors Code is certainly a good platform. We know that our members are already doing many helpful things that help prevent and protect Canadians, and we want to further that protection for all Canadians. One thing I'd add is that in other jurisdictions, they have expanded this beyond the banks, so into the non-bank financials. We would encourage looking at that as making sure that all Canadians have benefit of protections. And then the support for survivors is critical. In our work with scams, with senior protections and intimate partner violence, only a multi-stakeholder approach is going to solve this. These are very complex problems, and we need a comprehensive approach. So that's by way of saying thank you, and I'll see if Charles wants to add to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo Lori's remarks, and the banking industry is committed to working with their customers in an effort to prevent, identify economic abuse. And we really, and the industry takes this issue extremely seriously. And obviously, we're going to be working with the government and other stakeholders moving forward, and to address this important issue for sure.
Thank you, everyone. And we still have a few minutes, and I really wanted to get to Meseret last but not least, because Messi, yes, you can join us, of course. You have that dual perspective drawing both from your lived experience and also from your advocacy work with CCFE. So from those two perspectives, what do you hope this new code of conduct will change for survivors, and what do financial institutions, governments, anyone involved in that code must get right so that it actually makes a real difference for survivors and victims?
Yeah, thank you so much, Benedict, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. First of all, I would love to thank all the panelists. I know I'm the last speaker, and hearing this perspective reminds me that this moment is not just about policy and system. It's all about real life. It's all about real safety, and it's all about real future. I'm the founder of the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment, and also I have someone who have a lived experience. And then also it's truly honored to be here because this work, it took us a lot to be here. Many of the organization they know from the beginning and where we are at this time. And then of course, I'm also co-founder of the International Coalition Against Economic Abuse. I found this organization because I have seen the huge systemic barriers which shouldn't be ignored. And for many years, economic abuse, as you know, it was invisible in our system, including in our financial institution. And survivors were keeping, help, but the system usually is not there. So I believe, as someone who advocates, all survivor experience is real, and their fear is real. Their financial loss was real, and the language and the policy and the response was not real. And I knew that, so we need to change. That's why we're here. So from the very beginning of this organization, we began advocating to recognize economic abuse in Canada. And I want to say, honestly, it's not an easy work. We started this conversation at a time when economic abuse was rarely named and mentioned. Many systems even didn't see us at that time, including our in gender-based violence work. And then, of course, many policy also, they didn't reflect what economic abuse looks like even in Canada. But many survivors were still suffering, because of, the silence. So we brought forward all survivors' voice, and then stories were difficult even to hear. We brought a number of research. We did, I think, 2-3 research for the past, few years. And we also established a national task force I know some of you already have a member. This is also another, initiative what we did. And we engaged banks, government, regulators, community organization. We sat on the table. The issue was new. So this is our journey, and but we'll continue to raise and continuously also, work this job. What I would like to share is this form of violence is real. I know there's a taboo and shame because of the nature of the violence, and also financial matter is very private. So we need to first recognize this is a real forms of gender-based violence. That was a big, things I would love to share. And in addition to that, I would like also to acknowledge the government of Canada for their leadership, for the financial institution, and for the commitment of to protect vulnerable population. And this code of conduct is it's not small step. As I said, it takes us a lot to be here. And it's very important and necessary for Canada to move forward to ensure economic justice, to ensure in gender-based violence. And also I want to extend special thanks for Mr. Champagne office. I personally invited to address a keynote speak when the 2025, pre-budget announcement and code of conduct. That means so much for us because as someone who have a lived experience, because I carry many people who have lived experience, I carry many voices across Canada, so it means a lot. And I would like also to thank FCSC, Wage, and Finance Canada for bringing us this partnership. It means a lot for us. As I said, it takes us a long to get here. And from my personal lived experience, I have seen that there was little economic abuse awareness, whether in financial institutions, even gender-based violence sectors. And I experienced significant barriers, rejection, discrimination, accessing my own financial resources, either mortgage, insurance, housing, you just name it. And it took me a lot, and then it took a year to recover, to build stabilities and to secure my financial, gain. So that experience personally shaped my commitment to ensure, that when survivors reached out for help, they must meet informed, it must be compassionate, and it must be supportive. And I know some of you already mentioned, and I know how this is very critical for survivors. We knew that when women experience gender-based violence, the first contact person usually is financial institutions. So that's why we are kind of creating this platform. And this is a greater economic safety and independence for survivors across Canada is very critical. And we know victims often come to financial institution in a very difficult time of their life, and they try to come as to separate their finance, maybe rebuild their credit, maybe to regain even their financial resources, but we have seen that some victims were re-traumatized by the system. So that's why this code of conduct is very critical, and it's an urgent. I also want to acknowledge our team members because we advocated this work for many years. We're very grateful now where we are at, and this is a signal. We share the commitment in financial sector to recognize economic abuse in any ways. So we have seen also encouraging progress in other countries, particularly in the United Kingdom. So through the leadership of UK Finance and partnership, our sister organization C Bank have introduced, as you know, it's a guidance and practical tool for survivors. And also we have seen across Europe, financial consumer protection bodies are also beginning to integrate financial inclusion in their own financial safety framework. So recognizing this form of financial harm is very deeply connected. So these are the global example that shows it's very important. I personally also invited to speak last year at World Bank and IMF event. And then I also shared this concern Canada has to take, and then, leadership to introduce code of conduct. So for us, this code of conduct is not just a code, but it's also a legacy for us because we do a lot of things to advocate and to bring this issue at the forefront. And what we learn is from many countries, when guidance is consistent across financial institutions, survivors receive a predictable and supportive response. It's all about trust. And then also when staff trained, confidence will be increased and our quality of support will be improved. And of course, when financial institution in government and community works, when they come together, implementation becomes stronger and then trust grows because there are a lot of women, they don't want to go back they don't want to go to bank, and sometimes they want to use their cash. So we don't want to encourage, those cashless societies through our work as well. So banking is the most critical economic resource for a woman. So that's why we are kind of, try to advocate and support, victims. So this lesson is very relevant for Canada. From our perspective, this is a very essential success in Canada. Supporting vulnerable clients, as you already know, it's not only social responsibility, it's all about also sound risk management and good banking practice. Consistency across the sector is also very critical because survivor, they need us. That's the most important thing. And ongoing training, definitely, it's very important, as you mentioned. And also confidentiality is very critical as we through this process. That's my expectation as advocates. And accountability and evaluation also, that's really, really very important to see the real outcome of this code of conduct. So we know that this code is bringing a strong benefit also for financial institutions, not only for survivors. I know for those experts who work in this field, they can have more understanding. Of course, it builds client trust. It reduces also legal and reputational and operational, risk, as you mentioned. And it also helps financial harm to prevent fraud and coerced debt, which is also one of the most prevalent form of, economic abuse. So, and also it's positioned for financial institution as a global leaders and also responsible on ethical banking, because this is also one of the biggest issue I personally also witnessed when many countries also, when they come together and then to mitigate this impact. And also Mr. Champagne, also he mentioned this, like ethical banking is also very critical for this government. So, as the leader, as someone who have lived experience, and also as someone who's care about the future, I'm so encouraged to see, the guiding principles of this code of conduct. But what we are asking the government is it must be inclusive and trauma-informed approach, inclusive in a sense, making sure that all voices are included, with regardless of gender identity, color, race, and immigration status. And because their voice must shape their work, that gives a hope for everyone. And also, I truly, looking forward to work with all of you. And hopefully, this is a first step of intervention. And I hope this solves a lot of barriers for victims. Because we believe that banking is a safe space and, for victims of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Messi. That was a wonderful way to close this panel. If I were to summarize it, I'd say in addition to all the systems and the policies, what came out from all of you was the people at the heart of it, the people on both sides, the victims, the people who come to their bank looking for support and solutions, as well as the people within the banking systems that need to be better equipped to recognize and to respond in an empathetic and trauma violence informed way to move things further and build trust, like you were saying. So thank you. I want to call, there's still a lot of you online, even though we went over time. Thank you for your patience and your interest. We had so many questions. Michaela was tasked with reviewing them during the whole session. I think we're going to take maybe 5 to 7 minutes to try to tackle 1 or 2 questions if possible. Michaela, if you're with us, I do not see you on my screen. Yes, it's wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, I was looking at the questions, the Q&As. There were lots of different questions. I think one that came up a lot were, yes, so what are some of the safeguard changes being proposed to protect seniors and survivors from economic and financial abuse? So I think these were kind of like some of the questions, and also kind of more general, how can you prevent becoming a victim of economic abuse, or ensure family and friends are staying safe? Is
I'll pop
anybody?
in.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll pop in on
perfect.
keeping friends and family safe. It is the call to action for the Canadian anti-scam, but it will resonate across all of these issues, which is the stop, check, and talk. The talk is incredibly important. So sharing the resources. We have on our site, but our member banks do as well. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre has resources, but we also have educational materials that are non-commercial, that are to help elders, to help anyone going through financial abuse. I encourage people to reach out and talk to other people. If there's no one immediately next to you, there are other organizations that can be there for you. So if you think something isn't right, stop, check, and talk to someone, and that would be my encouragement.
Yeah,
Thank you, Lori.
I echo what Lori is saying. It's important to trust your instinct, slow down, reflect on the situation. And if something has you feeling unsure or uneasy, that's a red flag that you should not ignore. Some of the precautions that one might take to, prevent financial abuse is, keeping your financial documents in a secure private place, regularly monitoring your bank accounts, and appointing a power of attorney or a trusted contact, which we've heard about on this call. And then from scams prevention, ensure that you're dealing with a legitimate source when you're being asked to transfer funds. Never share your passwords, authorize unknown requests, or grant any access to anybody, a family or a friend, to any of your accounts. So there are just a few things that I think that, can help prevent financial abuse or a scam.
Great.
I would echo
Thank you
that.
so much.
And like, just to add one further point is, don't be afraid to discuss these issues with people that you love, people that you trust. Very often, to Lori's point about pausing and talking like that, very often is actually how frauds get uncovered, get discovered, get stopped, is that somebody has stepped in and listened and spoken, gotten over any sense of fear or shame or something that they might be feeling, and just open up and talk about it is super important.
And can I just add from a victim's perspective is that
Sure.
isolation and lack of communication is one of the strategies that is used in the psychological manipulation. So it was very hard for me to get out of feeling cornered by this person because of the intensity of the relationship that was happening. And it wasn't until I spoke to my friend after the money was sent that she said, you're involved in a scam. And she physically took my phone and blocked the caller. So it does take some awareness and recognition. I think this is why I'm speaking out. So advocate for it, is that this is a tactic. So the push towards isolation is the red flag. It's a
Right.
paramount red flag. There are other red flags, but as soon as you start being pushed into don't tell anybody about the relationship, all the lies that is the red flag that you need to step out of this and talk to somebody.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and also for the others. And I think it shows again that like isolation profits the abusive person, right? It really profits, and like it profiting from the societal shame and stigma that still exists. I think that really resonated. Thank you so much. I think having just a few more minutes, I've seen a lot of questions come up about the power of attorney, and more to the question what to do if there's a suspicion of like a misuse of the power of attorney. And maybe some of you could address like what there are some ways a person can do if there's a suspicion. And I will also use just a second to put the link for the evaluation of this webinar in the chat, because we would really love for people to give us some feedback for us for future webinars that we're planning. But yeah, please, if any of the panelists would like to comment on what are some of the remedies or like things we could do if there is like a suspicion of misuse of the power of attorney. That came up a few times.
I'll say that this is a huge problem, and one that we as a society are not very well equipped to deal with. It places it's very challenging for institutions. It's very challenging for family members. You know, ultimately, I think it's worth raising your concerns with a bank or other institution that you might be dealing with. But ultimately, and that may succeed in placing a bit of a pause on things, but you will probably need to go through the legal system at the end of the day which is unfortunate because, as we all know, it's expensive, time consuming, and so on. But ultimately, these problems do often end up being legal issues that need to be dealt with through the courts.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there anybody else from the panelists that would like to chip in on this question? Okay, I don't see any more. I think we're like almost 15 minutes over now. I don't want to stretch neither the participants nor the audience's patience. So I think I will hand it over to Ryan to close the webinar off from our side.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all panelists for joining us today. Thank you, Sandra, for sharing your personal experience and your insights on ways that we can address the gaps that are in the banking system and taking that forward as the code of conduct is being developed. And I'm hoping that from our conversation and the numerous questions that we have a follow-up webinar of some capacity in the next couple months, maybe just as a follow-up based on all the discussion questions that were posted. And as we move forward in the development of the code at the national level, as progress is being made, and giving updates to our community members and giving them information. I appreciate everyone's input. Lots of chat today in the chat box of good questions and comments. Again, just to reiterate that, please reach out to either CMPA or EAPO if you have a situation that you do need some support in, and we will try to help give you some guidance and support and navigating some services that may be available within the region that you're residing in. So again, thank you to our interpreters for your support and all the work with our partners with CCFW, CCFV and CNPA today. I really appreciate everyone's involvement in making this such an successful event. And as mentioned, there is an evaluation link, so we do appreciate your feedback and comments about next steps. Any topics that you want us to talk about in our future sessions would be most helpful as we move forward in planning. So thank you again, and have everybody have a wonderful day. And we will try to get the recording up within the next couple of days onto our website for people who want to review it again. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.